So who is this the very first time you've heard the story of manna and quail? No one. Oh, one person. Okay, excellent. Great. So this is an interesting kind of middle chapter in the life of the Israelites. So this is in the book of Exodus, which is a story of liberation. It is when the Israelites were enslaved in Egypt and how they were miraculously taken out of that bondage. And then they wandered for 40 years. Now, whether or not it was actually 40 years, we're not certain, but 40 is a metaphor for a completion, a really long time, right? And so we pick up this story here where they are in the wilderness. They have escaped Pharaoh and his armies, and they've crossed the Red Sea, and now they have gone through all of the supplies that they were able to take with them, and now they're feeling kind of stuck. Like, well, wait, if we're just going to die of starvation here, what good did this flight out of Egypt do for us, right? And it's really easy to look at a story like this and go, oh, those silly Israelites, they were just complaining. But actually, I think that the more important thing is to find ourselves in their story, right? So that very first part of this story, can you imagine what they must have been feeling? There is this idea of better the master that you know than the unknown, right? The phrase that we often bandy about, better the devil you know than the one you don't know, right? That I'm going to take my chances where at least I understand the parameters and the rules, as opposed to go off into the wild blue yonder, right? Because who knows what can happen there, right? And so, but sometimes when something new arrives to us, like the possibility of liberation, right? The possibility of coming out of bondage, that looks really exciting, right? And so there's this kind of outward motion until you run into the hard stuff and it stops you up short and you're like, oh, wait a second. Was this the right decision? Did I not look before I leaped? What's gonna happen? Right? My bodily needs are not being met. I'm afraid that we left what we knew just to be to find another way of dying. At least then, if we were in Egypt, we knew we were going to eat. And yeah, the labor was hard, but it might have been better than this unknown where we're not sure where our next meal is going to come from. Like we're running low on supplies. We're stuck between a rock and a hard place, right? So it's easy to read them as just being complainy, but I actually think they're pretty just human, right? How many times have we been asked to take a leap of faith, and then when the logistics come up, we're like, oh man, maybe that wasn't how are we going to make this work, right? Where is the next thing going to come from that allows this to continue? And so doubt happens in the wilderness, right? We ran headlong into the wild unknown only to be met by the hard realities of what it takes to feed a big camp of people, right? Fear can happen in the unknown. Looking back over our shoulder to say, gosh, wasn't it better then? It's tough to live life on the edge of your comfort zone. And yet, that's where God meets us, right? And there's a later chapter that kind of indicates that the Israelites get kind of sick of manna and quail after a really long time, right? And there's questions even in this section about what is this? Right? So here's this like weird like bread on the ground. What is this? It's not a sustenance that they recognized. It didn't look like the pots of meat and the loaves of bread that were readily accessible to them in Egypt. And I think that points to the way that sometimes God provides for us is not what we would necessarily choose for ourselves. Sometimes it looks kind of weird, right? And yet, as this story indicates, it is enough to sustain us, enough to nourish us, and give us the strength day by day by day to carry on the journey through the wilderness. When Jesus prays in the Lord's Prayer, give us this day our daily bread, this is what he's talking about, right? It's weird, this dew bread that melts away in the sun. It's a miracle in its own way. And then quail, birds, kind of like chickens, come and provide meat so that there is enough. There is enough, not just to sustain life, but for it to thrive in this unknown, liminal place. I am a student of womanism. Womanism, if you are not aware of what it is essentially Black feminism, right? If we talk about feminism, it is largely concerned with what white women need and want. And so womanism is a different type of feminism that looks at what is it that Black women need, under the assumption that if Black women are liberated, then the whole rest of the world will be liberated, because they hold so many marginalized identities that their uplift will liberate everyone. And so Black womanism is one of the most generous philosophies. It is unabashedly for specifically Black women, but they set a table and they say, everyone is welcome at this table. This table is for Black women, but if you are for Black women, you can be here. We're not going to bait anyone out, and there will be nourishment for you here, even if it is not necessarily the nourishment that you would choose for yourself, but it is a pathway toward liberation. Black womanist theologians are some of the most generous theologians who teach us how to welcome in the stranger, not just as an other worthy of our charity, but as a human being worthy of our relationship. They set a table of nourishment. And what we find in their philosophy and their mode of being is liberation. It is nourishment for all, the ways that Black women care for people in their arm's reach, that set a generous table. There is food for everyone. It may not be what you would pick for yourself, but it will nourish you. The last 3 years, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and all of the social unrest that we have experienced, all of the violence that we are experiencing now, it is a profound lack of nourishment. There is something that in this day and age, there are the structures that we understand, and imagining a world beyond structural inequality where we have some uneven footing, but at least we have some footing, is really scary. When we hear things like abolish the police, we don't hear the possibility on the other side of that. All we hear is what's going to be torn down, and there's a fear there, right? Just like the Israelites, what's going to happen to me if this thing that I've trusted goes away? Where are we, right? There's no structure yet to take its place. It'll be a vacuum. We're going to starve if we do anything differently, right? If there are different ways of thinking about our healthcare, if there's different ways of thinking about economic inequality, if there's different ways of thinking about racial justice. Wait, our whole system is based on these things, right? At least we have our pot of meat and our loaves of bread. It's enough, right? Even if it's holding us captive, even if it's keeping us apart from one another, we're afraid of what will happen when those systems are transformed. It would leave us in the wilderness, and we don't have supplies for that. And yet, this story invites us into imagination, right? I never in a million years would have imagined dew spread out on the ground that turns into flaky wafers, which are enough for me and my people to eat, right? That is godly imagination. Who would have thought that up? But God did. Right? And if we are co-creating with a liberating God, we are being asked out of our own enslavement to these systems of inequality, asked out of our comfort zone where we at least know we've got our pot of meat and our loaves of bread, and into a wild unknown where we are asked to trust one another and trust God. Whoa. Are we ready for that? There is a kingdom vision at the last part of this pericope, this story, right? Everyone has enough to flourish, not just survive. It is enough, and everyone is able to eat. Everyone is nourished, not just some people who work hard, right? Working hard in this didn't buy them anything else, right? It is the vision of human and planetary flourishing where the earth provided for the people. God provided for the people, and you gathered up only what you needed. And you gathered up twice as much on one day of the week so you could have a day of rest. And what happens, right? It gets moldy and gross and wormy. That's such a evocative, I don't know, right? Like it's such an evocative image, right? Like actually trying to hold on to more than you need made you ritually unclean in that framework, right? Oh, wow. That is completely antithetical to what we believe about America, right? That if you work hard, you'll be able to get your own and, stomp on anyone else to get there, but at least you've got yours, right? This is completely different. Working harder doesn't make you any more or less worthy of being nourished. Working less doesn't make you any more or less worthy of being nourished. There is enough for everyone, bread and meat. And yeah, it's not what you're used to eating, but it's there for you. And so when I think about what it means to be liberated, right? Liberation, after the doubt and the fear comes the provision, and then deepening into a liberated way of life, right? So in Egypt, they would have only been given what a lord or a master felt fit to give them. And who knows if that would have continued. And yet here, the very last verse we have is that even when Moses was angry with them, God still provided. Right? So your ability to be nourished doesn't actually hinge on you always being in right relationship with everyone. Right? God is generous and giving and wants to nourish you. Tony Cade Bambara writes in The Salt Eaters, "Are you sure you want healing? Healing is tough. It will change everything. Are you sure you want liberation?" The Israelites are not sure, but they rose to meet their doubt. Their complaints were heard and they were met with nourishment, right? Even in their not being sure. In the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous, in what we call the Big Book, there's a phrase that says, if this is healing, I don't want it, because when you stop investing in what is keeping you separate from the rest of the world, the first thing that comes for you is hurt. You check back into your body after you come down off of a substance, and the first thing is pain. If this is healing, I don't want it. Right? Same thing for the Israelites. They had all of the adrenaline as they were being chased, and then after that ran out, they were met with pain, hunger, doubt, fear. If this is liberation, I don't want it. And yet, there's wonder on the other side of that. There's nourishment on the other side of that. There is relationship on the other side of that. There's possibility on the other side of that. And so the last thing for this week that happens in the wilderness is possibility, right? It is a landscape that has not been caged in. They are walls that haven't been built. They are things that is nothing there to keep us apart from one another or keep us apart from God. And so God is allowed to be just as wild as the landscape. And so we are asked in this Lenten season to embrace the wild edges, to meet God at the edge of our comfort zone, to hear our own cries of complaint and fear and doubt, just like the Israelites, and to be met with that gospel truth that God is present with us and will nourish us, and it will come. And so, my friends, may we embrace all of what happens in the wilderness, our doubts and our fears, our hope and our possibility, our nourishment, as we travel through this season together. Amen.